Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the second book of Kings, Melachim Bet. We are at chapter 9, that is Perek Tes. And we have just read of the defeat. We read of the alliance between Yehoram, the king of the north, a descendant of Achav, Ahab, and between him and the southern kingdom of Judah, Achazyahu, who is now his cousin, because the two families had married together. We learned of their political alliance, their military alliance. We read of their defeat against Aram, and now the king of the north went to Jezreel, Yisrael, in order to recover from his wounds sustained in that battle, which he lost. We read of how Achazyahu, the king of Yehuda, was following the wicked ways of his maternal family and following the worshiping the Baal, the pagan ways of Baal. And now the stage is set for the final drawing of the curtains on the house of Omri. Omri being the one who began this, what was once very powerful dynasty of the northern kingdom, and the end of the northern kingdom, as had been predicted by God to Eliyahu, Elisha, the prophet Elisha's teacher, Eliyahu, who had battled Achav, Ahab, in the old days, and God had back then. And that was in the first book of Kings, chapter 19. If you remember, in verse 15 and 16, there, God told Eliyahu a few jobs that he had to do. One of them was to go and appoint Hazael as king over Aram. The second was to appoint Yehu ben Nimshi, the king over Israel, and to appoint Elisha ben Shaphat as his disciple to be the prophet. Now, we know Eliyahu went and did then go and find Elisha and start to train him as his disciple, as we've been seeing in this book of Kings until now. But the other two things hadn't yet happened, and apparently they were meant to be done by Elisha, the student of Eliyahu. We just read in the last chapter how Elisha went and appointed Hazael, which is part and parcel of the defeat of the northern kingdom, as Aram and Hazael were the attackers that helped bring about the end of the northern kingdom. And now he's going to set up Yehu as a new king who is going to rebel and make a coup against the house of Ahab, the house of Achav, the house of Omri, and destroy them, and they will then meet their end. So Elisha, in this chapter we're about to read, is going to fulfill that final instruction that God gave to Eliyahu, and finally bring about the end of the house of Achav, the house of Ahab. As we read through this event, this is going to be a lot of drama, a lot of action, and a lot of murder. This would make for quite a TV series, and quite intense. I'm going to read through it. This next two chapters, 9 and 10, which is basically the story of the coup of Yehu and the destruction of the house of Achav. And it's going to raise, as we go through it, I'm going to raise many, many questions and issues, but I'm not going to answer them yet. After we study chapters 9 and 10, we're just going to read the story first, allow these questions to percolate, and allow them to sit in your mind, so that afterwards I'm going to have a podcast in which I'm going to give a potential approach and understanding, a way to look at these chapters and how to learn something from it and how to understand what's actually going on here. So, for starters, let's read the story. So, now that, remember, Elisha had been appointed Eliyahu's successor, and this is going to bring about the end of the house of Achav. He appointed Hazael, the king of Aram. Now he does the next thing. Elisha hanavi karola achad mibnei hanaviyim. Elisha the prophet called one of the Bnei Hanavim, one of the sons of, and literally means sons of the prophets, but what it means is one of the student prophets. And we've had these Bnei Hanavim a lot these last few chapters. Vayomer lo, and he told him, Chagor masnecha, gird, little is often, tie up gird your belt, right? But kach pach shemen hazeh biyadacha, and take this a flask of oil. Remember, this flask of oil represents something with which a king is anointed. And we've seen many times, as David was anointed by Samuel, King Saul anointed by Samuel, that all the kings were anointed with a pach hashemen, with oil. V'lech Ramot Gilad, and go to Ramot Gilad. Uvasa Shama, when you come there, or Esham, you will see there Yehu ben Yehoshaphat ben Nimshi. Yehu, son of Yehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi. Earlier, he was just called Yehu ben Nimshi, often because people are called a descendant of their grandfather, often is called as son. You'll find him there, Uvasa, and when you get there, V'hakemoso mitoch echav, and you will single him out from among his companions, from his brothers, and you're going to bring him hidden into a hidden room. So he's already, first of all, Elisha is not choosing to do this by himself, but he's choosing to do this through his student. Why? What's the point of that? We're going to get back to that when we do our review, our discussion in a future podcast. But I just want to point out that question. And also, why is he taking he tells him to take Yehu into a secret room? Like, what's the point? What's the purpose of that? I'm just putting that question out there. Think about it, and we'll get back to it. You should take the flask of oil, v'yatzakta al rosho, and pour it over his head, v'yamarta, and you should say, Ko amar Adonai, so says God, mishachticha lemelech al Yisrael, I am appointing you as king over Israel. And immediately after you say that, open the door. You better run real fast and don't wait around. Now, the obvious reason why he's probably doing this and telling him to run like that is because once it becomes found out, then immediately you are guilty of treason, and people might come after you. And that's the most obvious way of understanding this. And what Elisha is clearly doing here is setting up a situation where you make Yehu the king, but then it won't be clear exactly. It'll be up to Yehu to bring it about. It will be in the hands of Yehu to decide how to go about becoming the king, which obviously will require deposing the current king and mounting a rebellion. So all you do is just give him this message. And it seems to, the only thing that this one of the students, who's not even the prophet himself, is simply relaying a message that it's time to do this. One gets the sense throughout this chapter that people kind of knew, especially the Bnei HaNeviim, those that were in the circle of the prophets, knew of this prophecy that was told to Eliyahu, that Yehu ben Nimshi was going to bring about the end of the house of Achav. It was just waiting for a signal, waiting for the time. And apparently it was in the hands of Elisha to deliver that message, and Elisha chose to deliver it in the manner in which we just read. So as soon as Yehu gets the message, he's going to carry out what he's been expecting to do this entire time. Vayelech Hanar Hanavi, and the young man who was the prophet, right, or it can also be translated, he was the nar of the prophet. He was the young man who worked with the prophet. So the way it repeats over and over again that he was a young man, it's again giving you the emphasis that he was really in the hierarchy of the prophet world. He was really kind of low down on the totem pole. He was pretty much a nobody. He was the student, he was a freshman student, so to speak, And he went Ramot Gilad to Ramot Gilad. Vayavo, and when he got there, Vihine Sarei HaChayil Yoshvim. He got there. There was a meeting of the Sarei HaChayil, the top commanders of the army, were sitting there. Remember, this was right after the big defeat by the Arameans against their army. So it's setting up a situation where the top brass of the army often have discontent about the leadership, about the king, because the king led them into defeat. Vayomer davar li elecha hasar. I have something for you, sir. Right? Vayomer Yehu el mimi kilanu. Which one of us? Because he seemed to have said that statement to the whole table. Vayomer elecha, sir. It's for you, sir. Right? So Vayakam Vayovo Abaisa. Instead of receiving the message in front of everyone, he got up as Elisha wanted to, and he went up and he went into the inner house. He went inside the house, and when he went inside the house, and the young prophet goes in with him, Vayitzok Hashem al Rosho, he pours the oil on his head, Vayomerlo, and he says to him, Ko Amar Adonai Elohei Yisrael, so says God, the Lord of Israel, Mishachticha lemelech al am Adonai El Yisrael. I have made you the king. I have anointed you the king over the nation of God, over Israel. If this also reminds us of, there were other pre-anointing done of kings under dubious circumstances. Most memorable, of course, was David, who was anointed once while Saul was still king, and then he was anointed again later when the people accepted him as king. Saul also was anointed more than once. This is a pattern here, and it's almost like Yehu gets the message, but he's obviously not actually king yet until he takes care of the current king, which we're about to read about. So what are you going to do? He continues telling Yehu the instructions, V'hikisa beit achav adonecha, and you are going to strike down the house of Ahab, your master, who is currently your master. V'nikamti demei avodai hanviim, and I will take revenge on over the blood of my servants, the prophets. Remember, as Achav had spent much of his career, and especially Achav's wife Izebel had spent much of her career, most of her life, harassing, murdering, killing the prophets of God. Udemei chol avdei Adonai, and the blood of all the servants of God, not just the prophets, but all people that were loyal to God. Miad Izebel, from the hands of Izebel, Jezebel, who was guilty of persecuting them. So you are now going to take that revenge. V'avad kol beis Achav, and the entire house of Achav will be lost, will be gone. V'hichrati le'achav mashtin bakira, and I'm going to destroy every male descendant of Achav. Mashtin bakir is a very crass, crude way of referring to male, basically saying anyone who pees against the wall. V'yatzor v'yazuv b'Yisrael, and anyone who is atzor v'yazuv. We've had this terminology before, meaning anyone who is either a bonded servant or anyone who is free among Israel. In other words, among their family, no matter who they are, I'm going to you will be the agent through whom I destroy the house of Achav. And I'm going to make the house of Achav like the house of Yeravam, of Jeroboam. Remember, his house was completely destroyed, Ukeves Basha ben Achia, and like the house of Basha, the son of Achia. Remember, the king Basha was also an earlier king of Israel who was completely destroyed and wiped out by the coup that was launched by Zimri. We're going to refer to that coup a little bit later. I just wanted to remind you of that. V'es Izebel, and Izebel yochlu haklavim, Izebel's body will be eaten by the dogs, B'chelek Yisrael, in the portion of Jezreel. Ve'ein kover, no one will bother burying her. Vayiftach hadelet vayanos, he immediately opened the door and ran, just in case he'd get caught. He didn't want to get caught and get killed for treason. So this is the very unusual appointment of Yehu. This will close this podcast. This will be the first half of chapter 9. I want you to think about the questions that I brought up. I'm going to raise a few more questions. And the other question is, what is it about Yehu? Like, why Yehu? Yehu was chosen all the way back in the days of Eliyahu. This is years and years before. One gets the sense, and I'm giving a little hint as to the direction that I'm going, but that Yehu had a relationship already with Eliyahu beforehand, had a relationship with the prophets beforehand, but then he ended up serving the king as a top military officer, serving the king Achav as a top military officer. And it seems when the prophet, the student prophet, comes having a message for Yehu that there's some understanding that already exists between him and Yehu. It's just a little hint that you start to get a sense of as you read these verses, and we're going to come back to that. So those are some of the questions that we're going to leave for later when we have a longer discussion. But for now, try to absorb this story, and we're going to continue the story in the next podcast. Thank you so much for studying this part of chapter 9 together. Looking forward to studying the rest of chapter 9, the rest of this interesting but very disturbing episode, and have a wonderful day.